I put a call out a couple weeks ago to ask people if they had any specific questions about guitar making, because if you've been watching my channel, I've been doing a lot of that type of stuff lately, and I get a lot of questions, so I thought I would do a Q&A video. It was overwhelming how many questions I got, and I'm going to do my best to cover all of them. I do want to preface this by saying I am not a luthier. I have no formal training. I'm just a dude that used to play guitar, and now I really like making guitars, and so I'm learning and growing and getting better. And I think that's kind of the point, though, is that I am just like a normal dude, and I can do it, so that means you can too. Now, of the questions I got, there were really three basic categories. One was about tools, one was about materials, and the most asked questions are about necks, because, well, they're scary to think about making. They're so precise and they're so little and detailed. I'm going to start with materials. ItDoc said he's a hobby builder, and how do you determine whether a piece of wood is good for guitar building? What types are suitable for which parts? Now that's a burning question that gets right at the heart of what I'm trying to do here with my work. I use reclaimed material. I think that it is ridiculous that we are continuing to deforest the Amazon and Africa to make guitars. I understand there's a whole other debate. We could have that conversation about tone wood. Yes, tone wood does exist. In my opinion, it is not as important as everybody makes it out to be. I have made guitars out of water skis and snow skis. I made a double bass out of a 2x4. I even made a ukulele out of my old compact disc, which, as you can see, it didn't work, but it did for a while. I've made guitars out of Doug fir, and they've worked fine. However, there are some drawbacks to using softer woods like that for durability and for making precise joints. That wood's tough to carve; it splits and splinters and stuff. So you're better off using denser woods. But in my opinion, there's no bad wood for making a guitar. I've used plywood, like the LVL they call it, that 1 3/4 thick plywood. That stuff worked great. I made a couple great guitars out of that. And I've used, like I said, Doug fir. Right now I've been using a lot of Kumaru because I just happen to have it, and it's a decking type material. It's out of Brazil. But just whatever you have access to. Your first guitar isn't going to be a Stradivarius. I know I'm mixing instruments. Don't expect it to be. Just make your first guitar. Trevor Minton asked, what do you do about wood with holes from ants, cracks, and general weathering? I leave it. You can fill it in with epoxy. You should probably make sure there's no living bugs in there. Like epoxy resins and stuff like that are really pretty good for filling in holes. I just made a guitar recently where I did butterfly joints through a big crack. You can do anything, really. It's really an aesthetic. However, if there was really severe cracks in it, that could become a problem where your guitar breaks. So make sure the crack is stable. Just make it stable like you would for a table, and you'll be fine. Jake G, what's the best way to actually acquire reclaimed wood, or at least what is a good way to obtain some for reasonable prices? Look on the side of the road, dumpsters. I buy it a lot from people that are in the business. If you search your area, there are probably deconstructionists or people that take down buildings and barns and save the wood and resell it. Pallets, of course, are always an option. But one of the best ways, if you want to talk about making guitars, is to buy old furniture, like dated furniture from the 70s or something. It's hardwood, usually. I mean, like the least it's going to be poplar, which is a lot of guitars are made of. And it might not be thick enough. It might only be 3/4 inch thick, but you can glue it together and laminate it and get creative with it. Josh Starkey, when you use, quote, reclaimed sorts of materials, how do you make sure it's solid and won't warp, especially for necks? That's a good question. I find that using reclaimed material usually means that it's pretty dry because it's old, so you don't have to worry about that too much. But the necks, they're under a lot of tension, and I wouldn't use a 2x4 to make a neck. As a rule, I would use something harder than pine, but that's about it. Basses are a little trickier. They're under a little more tension and they're a little longer. You might need something a little bit stronger for that. Studio des Penats. I have no French accent, sorry. How many guitars, basses did you build before upgrading to CNC? I don't know. I made a lot of them. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. A lot of them didn't, and that's the process. Now, I happen to know that, I forget your name, but I remember that you make really cool instruments out of reclaimed materials. So Studio des Penates, Penates, search his YouTube channel. You can check out his work. It's pretty cool. Would you let guitar players review your old door guitars or skate bass, etc.? Maybe on your other channel. I have another YouTube channel I started recently that is I'll just be playing and demoing some of the instruments I made, and I'm also doing a series with other musicians, having them play them and having a discussion about them. I invite you to go check that out. I'll put a link in one of the corners here. And yes, I absolutely would. How much of a leap is it from building an electric to building an acoustic? Any plans to build an acoustic in the future? And how much do you love me? From Stuart Morrison. I love you very much, Stuart Morrison. Building an acoustic guitar is much more complicated than building an electric guitar because you have to build this box that can handle the tension, and then your tone wood and you know, sustain and all that stuff becomes more of an issue. With electric guitars, the electronics do a lot of that heavy lifting. But it's, you know, like I said, I made one out of compact discs. It worked. and I do have plans to do some stuff in the future. I have some ideas, some things I want to try. And then Luis asked, Tim, I'm forever curious about the acoustics and the different materials you use, even the different woods. Well, that's the same question. I should have read those together. I like to see how far I can get away with like using garbage. You know, that's my personal thing. You know, I mean, just spruce is what most violins are made out of on the tops. And I'm not super versed in acoustic instruments. I haven't really graduated to that yet. I have messed around a little, and I do plan on doing more, so stay tuned. This video is not sponsored by Stringjoy Guitar Strings per se, because they're not paying me to, but I want to dedicate it to them because I just started working with them, and they are amazing. I'm going to be using Stringjoy Guitar Strings on all of my guitars from now on, and what I like about the string, besides the fact that they're awesome, is that they're made right in Nashville, Tennessee, in America. The company was started by a musician who was, you know, looking for something better and something different, you know, kind of like what I'm trying to do here. And he also donates money to music education programs for every set of strings sold. So you can't beat that. That's like, I'm all into that. So check out Stringjoy. You can also buy individual strings if you're making cigar box guitars and stuff too. Great company. Okay, about the hollow core door. This was an exciting one for me, and it was Stanley Shostak that asked me to talk about this a little bit. The big problem was, is basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a door. You can see there's where the doorknob was. Just cut a guitar shape out of it and bolt a neck to it, because these hollow core doors are the first thing that end up in dumpsters, and I wanted to see if I could find a viable use for it. I have found tons of uses for this thin plywood. You can actually peel these apart and use it. But to just do that, to just make this a guitar right out of a door is really difficult because you're not going to have the internal wood in the right spots that you need it. So I ended up gluing little pieces of wood inside, you know, and gluing pieces of wood here to bolt the neck, and gluing a piece of wood there for the bridge, and then trying to glue pieces of wood around the edge, and it just didn't work. Well, woodwork is to just peel the luans off, build a frame in the shape you need, glue them back on. But that to me is just like, you might as well just, you know, use plywood. I really wanted to push the door idea. It was just a pain in the neck. I tried so many times to do it that way, and it didn't happen. Hawk and Travel, Mr. Kevin C. Ryan, Art the Boy, and I think a couple others asked me about tools and making guitars with minimal tools. As many of you probably know, I have a CNC machine now. I have this amazing CNC router parts machine. And so I do a lot of my cutting on that. Prior to having that about 2 years ago, I did it all by hand. And then the big question too about tools is like, you know, minimal tool builds for guitars. It's completely possible, completely doable. And, you know, I would love to do a video series doing that. What I was thinking I would use is a skill saw, a router, a jigsaw, and a sander, maybe an angle grinder. Just handheld tools. And then, of course, you know, rasps and screwdrivers. I would love to do that series. The problem is that it would be a lot of time, and I still make things for a living. Like, I do make income from YouTube ad revenue, but you know, not a lot. And I do have a Patreon page which pays me a little bit, but it's not enough for me to just take the time to just create content on this channel. If you can support me on Patreon, that is a huge help, and that would help me have more time to do this type of thing in the shop, because, you know, while I love doing this is really just taking away from me making a living. But I love to share, and I love meeting all of you, which is why I continue to do it for like 6 years now. And if I can get enough support, you know, financially and just from, you know, people that are interested in seeing it, I will do that. I will do a complete series of hand tool build. So that's enough of me begging for money. Let's get back to necks are next. This is the way I'm making these right now. I am making a neck that has a flat sort of headstock. See how the headstock is parallel to the fingerboard? and it's a bolt-on neck. See how it bolts to the body? That's a pretty easy way to start, and the reason I'm doing them this way is for material efficiency. Another way you can do them is to have a headstock that angles back slightly. See how it's at an angle from the fingerboard? Which is actually my preferred style of guitar neck, but it requires more material for me to do it on the CNC right now. But I'm working on some ideas to change that. And you can also do a neck through body. This is an old one that I've since carved up. Let's start with the assumption you're going to do a bolt-on neck. First thing to think about, if you want to make a guitar and you're worried about the neck, don't make the neck. Just make a body. Buy a neck on eBay for 30 bucks. Make a body that fits that neck. Once you've got that guitar up and running, now make a neck. Use the neck that you bought for 50 bucks as a template and go from there. Okay, here's sort of a breakdown of the neck and its components. Here's one, and you can see that this is actually pine we're talking about. This is just Doug fir that I made this neck out of. And this is all made by hand, carved out of the wood. The fingerboard is a different wood. It looks like rosewood, perhaps. And then I have these metal frets in there. Sandwiched in between there is a truss rod. Check this out. You twist it one way. This is a two-way truss rod. Twist it one way and it bows up. You see that bow? Twist it the other way and it bows that way. So you can put this rod down the middle and you can turn that to push the neck and strengthen it in whatever direction you need to. Goes in there. Then you glue your fingerboard over it. And that's it. How do we get there? Imagine we're starting with a block of wood. You want to do all of your math. You want to find the center. You want to route this slot out. Everything before you cut the neck shape. Same goes for the guitar body. Get all your stuff figured out first. If this, suppose this block of wood here is your body, figure out where your pickups are going to be, where your neck is going to go, draw it all out while you have straight lines to work off of and parallel spots. Route out the holes, make the cavities, draw the body, use pencil. You're going to sand it all anyways. Draw all over the thing, a magic marker, Sharpies, pencils, pens, whatever. Figure it all out, make it happen, then cut the guitar shape out. Same with the neck, because once you cut this shape and it's no longer parallel, now it's really hard to get things straight. Same goes with the fretboard. You can buy, this was a pre-slotted one that was given to me, and a lot of these parts I have to thank my buddy Dylan for donating a lot of these parts to me from his father, who was a guitar maker. You can buy these pre-slotted, or you can buy this piece of wood and you sit down with a very skinny little saw and you know, very carefully measure that all out, and you can cut the slots, but do it while it's straight. Don't cut your neck shape first, then do it, because then you're never going to get these perfectly parallel lines all lined up. So to get your fret measurements, there's calculators online. At stumac.com you can use the fret calculator, and you can go in there and you can say how many frets you want, how long you want it to be, the length of the strings down the guitar, and it'll tell you how many, you know, all the measurements down to the thousandth of an inch, and you can print those out and, you know, transfer those to wood or CNC or whatever. Do it all while it's straight. This is a handy tool I have. I bought this, or you can make your own. This is a 12-inch radius, which means that if the circle were to continue around, it would be 12 inches in diameter. And you can use this as a sanding block to give a slight contour to your fingerboard before you fret it. And you can even start all that before you put it on the guitar. Like you can see, this was one here I started, you know, fretting before I put it on the guitar. So you can buy the fret wire in these sticks, and you can see they have a little tang on the end. So that's what goes into the slot, and it kind of grabs the wood. You're going to want to pre-bend these a little bit before you put them in. They make tools. I made a tool. I have a video about that out of some skateboard bearings, so you can kind of radius this ahead of time before you put it in, or you can just do it by hand very carefully. I tend to use, I made this brass hammer, but you can just, you know, buy one or use something else. But the brass is a little bit softer, so it won't dent the frets, to kind of tap them in, or you can press them in with a press. Once they're in, I just use, they sell all these special tools for it, but I use these bull nips, and I can nip them very close to the edge, and then I can just sit down and do a belt sander, very carefully though, so you don't heat them up and knock them out. Very carefully sand that all in. That's how you get your frets in. From there, there's a lot of work with fretting, and that would maybe be a whole other video talking about fretting and leveling and all this stuff. You can use power tools or just good old-fashioned rasps to do the shaping on the back. I've done it with rasps before. It works great. Sometimes I use angle grinders with sanding discs, which also works great, but you got to be careful with that because it's real easy to go in a little too far with that. And you know, make your shape. It's all very basic, easy hand work that anybody can do. It just takes patience and practice. You know, make sure when you clamp this down, you get even, consistent pressure all the way down, which is a little tricky because it's round. I've cut some wood with some kind of radiuses like this block, and sometimes I'll use things like this to help clamp it. Take your time, be patient, you can do it. And if it fails, try again. Just try again. I talk about this tool all the time when you're making your guitars. My buddy SDM Woodworks, you can check him out on YouTube, developed this. It's basically just two rulers, and you can line them up right at the nut, and then into the wood of the guitar, and they're on these bolts, so you can adjust them to the taper of the neck. You can line it up so you have a ruler on both sides, and now you can use this and draw lines down your body and center you figure out exactly where your bridge needs to go, how far away it needs to be. I usually go 25.5 is the scale I usually use, so you can draw a line where your strings need to go, you can figure out where your pickup's going to go, you can center it to these lines, you can remove this. Super useful tool for helping you find all your centering and stuff. Templates. You can buy these templates, you can make your own if you're patient, or you know, by hand, and you don't have to use industry standard ones necessarily if you're doing your own thing. You don't have to use this style neck, which is like a Fender style, but you use these templates and you can draw, you know, route out your all your pockets so they're perfect. Make them. Here's one I made out of. Here's a body template I made out of just a piece of plywood, and if you make templates and you use routers and everything's going to be perfect, take your time, take shallow passes, clamp these down good. Make your templates with a lot of extra space so it makes it easier to clamp it down. And you could use like a Forstner bit to hog out most of the material before you go in and route to save some time and stuff. And here's a trick. You can buy those router bits, pattern bits that have a bearing on them. I found this one, it was expensive. I think Armada made it, but it's a 1/4 inch pattern bit, so it's very small. And it gets into these tight spaces real easily instead of like the bigger 1/2 inch ones like you would get at the box store. And since it's so small and it costs so much, it makes me extra careful with it to not try to bite off too much and then screw something up or have it move and hit my template. So you just do little passes with this thing, very accurate. Let's talk about carving out the nut. Chancey Green and some other people asked about some of the precision factors of making guitars, and I don't want to get into the frets. I do have a video I'm making next where you can kind of see what I do, and maybe we'll do some more like in-depth tutorials in the future, but carving out the nut is a pretty big challenge, and it's something that I'm still working on getting better at. I'm going to show you what I do right now. Strings are very specific. You can see those numbers there around where it says light. Those are the gauges. Those are in measurements of inches. So it's 0.010 inches is the skinny one, the IE string. I have to carve slots in here that are equidistantly spaced, or at least spaced how I want them to be, for the strings so they can go over this nut and into the tuners. And they have to be wide enough to hold the string, but not too wide so it doesn't buzz and vibrate in there, and deep enough so the string comes down and is just barely above the fret, but it can't be touching it. And then you have to level the frets out down the whole board and stuff. So there's a little bit of of work there, and a lot of it just comes from practice and trial and error and stuff. One useful trick. Oh yeah, they make these out of bone a lot, which I don't because that's just gross. So I use things like corian, or sometimes a really dense hardwood like ebony. I've even used brass and aluminum. They work really well. Things that I can use my woodworking tools with. So like this piece of corian, you can see I cut an angle into it. This is what I've been messing around with lately too. I'm going to put it in its place. Then I have this half a pencil that I can now put. It's like flat and like, so the point is just right on the ground here. Like if I would put it down, put it right on the frets, up against my nut, and I can go like that, and I can draw the radius and the height of my first fret. So now I can use that to cut my nut out, and I cut above that, way above it to start, and then I can start putting my notches in for my strings, and I know if my notch goes down to touch that pencil line, I've gone too far and I'm going to have to start over. Now, how am I going to make the notches? They sell very fancy and expensive fret files or nut files like this one that you can use to cut it. Or you can just buy files and eyeball it, and then here's another one of these fancy ones. So you can buy those. I probably never would have bought these if they were given me by my buddy Dylan, and I use them all the time. But before I had these, I used just regular old files. Hand saws, like a little pull saw. You know, I use my digital calipers to measure saw blades and work from there. And then this is a neat little trick. You can get a set of feeler gauges from the auto parts store and just make them into little saws. And they are, you can see, you can get the exact, you know, dimensions that you want. You can put two of them together, like I could put together 7 and 8 if I want 15. This has been working really well for me, and what I do is I go a little bit undersized. So I've been using this 007 to cut my .010 slot hole because I'm not perfect. I line this up, I can put the strings on the guitar loosely, and I can eyeball them so they look like, so they're equidistant. And you know, spaced the way I want them and stuff, and then I can take the little saw and notch where they each go, like that. And then I can carve them out, you know, with the wider saws and files for the wider ones. Go very slowly, little bits. You got to tune it up, tune it down, take your time with it, and get it right. And like I said, I'm still working on that, learning how to do it. Once you've got it all done and you're happy with it, you can go ahead and polish this all up, and maybe just put a dab or two of super glue to keep it from moving. And you're done. And that way, if you ever need to take it off, you can just bang it and break the super glue free. Well, this video is probably too long. Sorry about that. There's a lot to cover. I think I covered just about everything that was asked. And if not, you go ahead and ask questions below. I can maybe answer them you know, via writing, or I can maybe do another video like this. Again, if you like this sort of thing, please like, share, and subscribe. I did put a bunch of video links in the show notes and probably scattered throughout this video of other builds that I've done that might further illustrate some of the things I'm talking about now, so you can go click on those if they're of interest to you. And again, Patreon is the absolute best way to support this channel, so I can take the time to do more things like this. If you appreciate and enjoy these types of things, support me on Patreon. I can do more of it, and I also do stuff on Patreon that I don't do here. Like, I give stuff away a lot. Like when I make my silly things, I just randomly mail them to patrons in those levels. So, all right. Thank you all very much for watching, and be good.